On a wind-cut morning in March of 1983, in Barton County, Kansas, the sale yard outside Great Bend filled with men who had come to watch something they already thought was a mistake. The listing was plain. One 1951 Farmel M chassis, no engine, no radiator, no wiring harness, tires half-cracked, paint burned down to iron. Starting bid, $200. She stood there in a canvas coat that had seen more seasons than most of the men watching her. Her name was Clara Whitaker, 71 years old. 46 harvests on the same 160 acres her husband had bought in 1937 for $6,400. Her hands were steady. Her boots were worn at the outer edge where years of walking fence lines had left their mark. The auctioneer didn't expect a bid. $200. Anyone? Clara raised her hand. A few men laughed, not loudly at first, then louder when no one countered her. The gavel fell. $200 for a tractor that could not run, could not move, and by most standards should have been scrapped 20 years earlier. Let me tell you about that tractor. It had started life in Rock Island, Illinois, in late 1950, shipped to a dealer in McPherson County. 44 drawbar horsepower, 5-speed transmission, built to pull through Kansas clay that could break lighter machines in a single season. It had once belonged to a man named Harold Jensen, who used it to plow 240 acres of wheat ground until the summer of 1976, when a thrown rod tore through the block during second cutting. He parked it behind his machine shed. It never moved again, until Clara bought what was left of it. Across the lot stood Daniel Pierce, 34, regional lending officer for Prairie State Bank. New boots, clean jacket, a man who understood balance sheets better than soil moisture. He watched Clara sign the receipt with a look that wasn't cruel, just certain. "Ma'am," he said, stepping closer, voice carrying just enough of the men behind him to hear, "you just bought yourself a very expensive lawn ornament." The laughter came this time without hesitation. Clara folded the receipt, placed it into her coat pocket, and looked at the tractor as if she were looking at something complete. "I don't reckon I did," she said. No argument, no explanation. Just that. They loaded the Farmel M frame onto a flatbed that afternoon. Chains tightened, steel against steel. It creaked like something waking up after a long sleep. Let me tell you about Clara Whitaker. She had been farming alone since November 1978, when Thomas Whitaker died of a heart attack in the Northfield while checking a pivot that had frozen in place. She found him there before sunrise, frost already settling into the denim of his jacket. After that, neighbors offered help. Some stayed a season. Most didn't. Farming was changing. Bigger equipment, bigger loans, smaller margins for error. Clara didn't expand. She didn't borrow beyond what she could pay in a single season. And she didn't replace machines unless they absolutely refused to work anymore. Which is why, by 1983, most of what she owned was older than Daniel Pierce. She brought the engineless tractor home and parked in the machine shed next to a 1962 Alice Chalmers WD-45 that still ran clean, because she serviced it every 50 hours without fail. The Farmel sat there hollow, stripped, quiet. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then on the 4th, Clara drove into town and stopped at a scrap yard on the edge of Ellenwood. She walked past rusted plows, broken combines, and a line of truck engines stacked too high. She stopped at a 5.9-liter Cummins 6BT diesel that had come out of a wrecked 1981 Dodge grain truck. The yard owner told her it ran when it was pulled. She asked how much. $800. She didn't haggle. Daniel Pierce heard about it that evening. By the end of the week, half the county knew. A 71-year-old woman had bought a dead tractor and was now buying a truck engine to put into it. The laughter grew teeth. And when she started cutting steel in her machine shed, sparks lighting up the Kansas dusk, no one yet understood what she was building. But Daniel Pierce decided he was going to find out. He pulled his truck into her drive the next morning, stepped out, and what he saw inside that shed made him stop mid-step. Because the empty frame of that Farmel M was no longer empty, and Clara was not working alone. There were no hired men in that shed, no mechanics from town, no young neighbor helping out for a few dollars and a hot meal. Just Clara, a welding torch, and a layout drawn in chalk across the steel rails of a machine that had been written off 7 years earlier. Daniel stood in the doorway, the smell of cut metal and old oil thick in the air. "What exactly are you doing?" he asked. Clara didn't look up right away. She finished a well bead, lifted the mask, and set the torch aside. "Making it useful again," she said. Let me tell you about what she meant. The original Farmel M engine had been a gasoline-powered inline-4, roughly 248 cubic inches. Simple carburetor, magneto-ignition, reliable for its time but thirsty, and more importantly, obsolete by 1983 standards, when diesel engines had already proven themselves in torque, fuel efficiency, and longevity. Clara wasn't restoring the tractor. She was changing it. The Cummins 6BT she had bought was a different kind of animal. Inline 6, direct injection, around 105 horsepower in its stock truck configuration, nearly double what the original Farmel had ever produced. But horsepower wasn't the real story. Torque was. And Clara understood that in a way Daniel didn't yet. She had already fabricated new mounting brackets to fit the longer engine block into the narrower frame. The firewall had been cut back. The transmission housing had been reinforced with steel plates she had salvaged from an old combine header. Daniel stepped closer, boots crunching on metal filings. "You know, that transmission isn't built for that kind of power, right?" he said. Clara wiped her hands on a rag. "It's not built for speed," she replied. "It's built for pull." That was when the men behind Daniel laughed. He hadn't realized others had followed him in. 2 neighbors, one dealership mechanic, and the yard owner who had sold her the engine. The mechanic shook his head. "This is going to tear itself apart," he said. "You put that much engine in that frame, you'll shear gears first time you hook to a load." Daniel smiled slightly, not unkindly, but certain again. "That's what I was thinking." The laughter came sharper this time. Confident, comfortable, shared. Clara didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just picked up the chalk and drew a line across the transmission housing. "I'm not using it the way it was used before," she said. That quieted them, but only a little. Have you ever known something would work before you could prove it? Have you ever stood in a room where everyone else had already decided you were wrong? That's where Clara stood. Let me tell you something most people never hear explained right. Horsepower is what gets talked about. It's the number printed on brochures, the figure dealers use to sell you something new. But torque is what actually moves weight. Torque is rotational force. It's what lets an engine keep turning under load, without stalling. Old tractors like the Farmel M were built with heavy gearing to multiply modest engine power into usable pull. But a diesel like the Cummins doesn't just produce more torque. It produces it at lower RPMs, steady and sustained. Clara wasn't trying to make the tractor faster. She was trying to make it unstoppable. Daniel crossed his arms. "And fuel?" he asked. "You planning on running diesel through a system built for gasoline?" Clara walked over to a bench where a set of lines and a modified tank sat. "Already handled," she said. The mechanic laughed again, but there was a flicker of something else now. Not respect yet, but attention. Over the next 3 weeks, the county watched. Clara aligned the drive shaft with precision that came from decades of feel rather than formal measurement. She fabricated a custom coupling to mate the diesel output to the Farmel's transmission input. She reinforced weak points before they could fail. Daniel came back twice, then 3 times. Each visit, he stayed longer. Each visit, he asked fewer questions. By April 12, 1983, the engine was mounted. By April 18th, the fuel system was complete. By April 21st, the wiring was done. The day she tried to start it, half the county showed up. They stood outside the shed, arms crossed, hats low, waiting. Daniel stood at the front. Clara climbed onto the seat, older than the machine beneath her, steadier than any of them. She turned the key. The starter engaged. The engine turned once, twice. Then it caught. And the sound that came out of that tractor was not the sound anyone expected. It wasn't loud in the way people anticipated. Not the sharp, uneven bark of an old gasoline engine struggling to find rhythm. This was deeper, steadier, a low, controlled rumble that settled into the frame of the tractor like it had always belonged there. The crowd stopped talking. The laughter didn't just fade, it disappeared. Clara let the engine idle for a full minute, listening, not with her ears alone, but with her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, feeling vibration, imbalance, anything out of place. There was nothing. Daniel took a step forward. "That shouldn't sound that smooth," he said quietly. Clara shifted into first gear. The clutch engaged. The tractor moved. Not fast, not dramatically, just forward, controlled, certain, like it had never spent a day sitting broken behind a shed. But movement wasn't the test. Everyone there knew that. "Hook it to something," the mechanic said. Clara nodded once. They brought over a loaded grain wagon. 10,000 pounds easy. Maybe more. The kind of load that would make an original Farmel M work for every inch. They chained it. Clara didn't rush. She eased the throttle. The diesel didn't strain. It didn't rev high. It dug in, and the wagon moved. Not an inch. Not two. It rolled forward like the weight behind it had been misjudged. A murmur went through the crowd. Daniel felt it before he admitted it. Something in his certainty shifted. Let me tell you about what happened next. 3 days later, a late spring storm rolled across Barton County. Not unusual, but this one carried rain that didn't stop. Fields softened, then saturated. By the 4th day, ground that had been ready for planting turned to something closer to soup. Modern tractors, larger, heavier, designed for efficiency on firm ground, started to struggle. Tires sank, ruts deepened, work stopped, except on Clara's land. Daniel drove out there on April 27th. He didn't come as a banker that day. He came as a man trying to understand something. From the road, he could see it. The Farmel M moving steadily across a field that had trapped 2 newer machines just a day before. The narrower frame, the adjusted weight distribution, the controlled torque from the diesel engine, all of it working together in a way no one had planned for, because no one had thought to. Clara turned at the end of the row and saw him. She didn't stop. She finished the pass. Then another. Only when she reached the edge of the field did she idle down. Daniel walked out, boots sinking slightly with each step. "I owe you an apology," he said. Clara looked at him, not unkindly. "For what?" "For laughing," he said. She nodded once. "Most people do," she replied. "Have you ever watched something prove you wrong, slowly, undeniably? Have you ever had to stand there and let it happen, knowing you can't argue with results?" Daniel stood there longer than he expected to. He watched her work. He watched the machine. And for the first time, he started asking different questions. Not will it work, but why does it? The answer wasn't simple. It was design, experience, patience, and a refusal to accept that something was finished just because it had stopped working once. By May, other farmers started coming by, not to laugh, to look, to ask. The mechanic came back too. He didn't joke this time. He asked about the coupling, the reinforcement plates, the fuel system adjustments. Clara showed him. Not everything, but enough. And Daniel realized something else. This wasn't just a one-time success. This was knowledge, practical, earned, transferable, and it was coming from someone most of them had already dismissed. By June, Clara's fields were planted, ahead of schedule, in a season where many were behind. Daniel returned to the bank that week and pulled her file. He read it differently now. No missed payments, no unnecessary loans, no wasted purchases, just quiet consistency. He closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, because the number he had been sure would eventually fail was now the one he trusted most. And what he decided to do next would change more than just Clara's farm. By the fall of 1983, word had spread beyond Barton County, not in newspapers, not in headlines, but in the way real stories travel, through conversation, through neighbors, through men who had seen something with their own eyes and couldn't quite explain it without telling the whole thing from the beginning. A tractor with no engine, a woman everyone underestimated, and a machine that now did work others couldn't. Daniel Pierce made a decision that September. He changed the way he evaluated risk. Not completely, not recklessly, but enough. When farmers came in with unconventional plans, modifications, rebuilds, repairs instead of replacements, he didn't dismiss them outright anymore. He asked questions, real ones. What are you changing? Why will it work? Show me. Let me tell you about what happened to that farmland. By 1988, 5 years later, it was still running. The Cummins engine had logged over 3,000 hours. The transmission, reinforced, respected, never abused, held. Clara had replaced seals, adjusted linkages, maintained it with the same discipline she applied to everything else. Other farmers had started similar conversions. Not all worked, but enough did, and every one of them traced back in some way to that shed in Barton County. Clara never expanded her farm. She didn't need to. Efficiency replaced scale. Understanding replaced assumption. By 1993, 10 years after the auction, Daniel stood in that same yard again. Different sale, different crowd. He wasn't there to laugh. He was there to bid, not on something new, on something overlooked. Clara passed in the winter of 1996. Quietly, at home, the farm went to her daughter, Ellen, who had grown up watching that same machine come back to life. The Farmel M stayed, still running, still working, still carrying inside it the decision that had once made a group of men laugh out loud. Daniel attended her funeral. He stood at the back. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, because the lesson had already been learned. Machines don't decide when they're finished. People do. And sometimes the people who are wrong are just the ones who stopped looking too soon. If you've ever known someone who saw value where others saw scrap, someone who kept something running long after the world gave up on it, tell me about them. Those are the stories that matter. And there's another one coming, about a farmer in Missouri who rebuilt a combine from 3 different wrecks and ran it for 15 years without a single loan payment. You want to hear that one too. Some things don't become obsolete. They just wait for someone patient enough to understand what they were meant to do.